When a billionaire CEO appears uninvited in your kitchen at midnight, you expect demands, threats, or legal papers. What Ethan Cole never expected was the truth. Victoria Hale, the woman whose name appeared on his paychecks, whose company had consumed 2 years of his life, stood in his cramped apartment looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. She wasn't there to fire him. She was there to confess. And what she was about to reveal would shatter everything Ethan thought he knew about loyalty, sacrifice, and the price he'd been paying for someone else's greed. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's begin. The apartment door stuck the way it always did. Ethan Cole put his shoulder into it, felt the warped wood scrape against the frame, and stumbled into the darkened hallway with exhaustion weighing on every muscle. 11:40 at night. Another 16-hour shift at Hale Industries distribution center. Another day of his body screaming for rest that never came. He dropped his keys on the small table by the door, the same table where Lily left her drawings, where overdue bills collected like autumn leaves. The apartment was silent. Mrs. Chen from 3B would have put Lily to bed hours ago, probably reading her the same worn copy of The Velveteen Rabbit that Ethan never had time to finish himself. The guilt sat heavy in his chest, familiar as an old scar. 7 years old, and his daughter knew her father better as an absence than a presence. Knew the sound of the door opening late at night, the smell of warehouse dust on his clothes, the hollow apologies for missed school plays and parent-teacher conferences. Ethan moved through the darkness toward the kitchen, thinking about the leftover pizza that might still be edible, the beer that would help his shoulders unknot enough to sleep. He didn't turn on the light. Didn't need to. He'd navigated this small space so many times in the dark that he could map every worn floorboard, every scratch in the laminate counters that the landlord refused to replace, which is why he noticed immediately that something was wrong. There was a presence, a subtle shift in the air, the faint sound of movement where there should have been nothing. Ethan's hand found the light switch, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs. The kitchen flooded with harsh fluorescent light. A woman stood at his sink. Ethan's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. She wasn't a stranger, or rather, she was. But he recognized her face the way you recognize someone from television, from photographs, from the glossy pages of business magazines that appeared in the break room at work. Victoria Hale, CEO of Hale Industries. The woman whose signature appeared on company-wide emails, whose portrait hung in the corporate lobby 20 miles from the warehouse where Ethan spent his life moving boxes. She was washing a dish, his dish, in his kitchen. She looked up at him, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Ethan registered details his exhausted brain couldn't quite assemble into meaning. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, not the power suits he'd seen in photographs. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry except a watch that probably cost more than 3 months of his rent. She looked terrified. "Mr. Cole?" she said quietly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to frighten you." Ethan's hand was still on the light switch. His body had gone into a strange kind of autopilot, the same instinct that kicked in when machinery malfunctioned at the warehouse. Assess the danger, protect yourself, figure out what the hell is happening. "How did you get in here?" His voice came out rough, harder than he intended. "The superintendent let me in. I explained that it was urgent company business." Victoria set the dish down carefully in the drying rack, one of Lily's plastic plates with the faded unicorn pattern. "I asked him not to mention it. I wanted to speak with you privately." "At midnight? In my apartment?" Ethan moved further into the kitchen, putting himself between this woman and the hallway that led to Lily's bedroom. "You want to talk? We talk at the facility. During business hours. This is—" "I know." Victoria held up her hands, a gesture of surrender. "I know how this looks. I know I have no right to be here. But I needed to speak with you outside of official channels, and I needed to do something while I waited. I saw your kitchen, and I—" She trailed off, looking at the now clean counters, the organized dish rack, the swept floor. "I'm sorry. I didn't know what else to do with my hands." Ethan stared at her. This was insane. This was some kind of corporate psychological game, some new management strategy he'd never heard of. CEOs didn't break into employees' apartments. They didn't clean kitchens. They didn't look at him with eyes that held something that looked almost like shame. "You're going to fire me," he said flatly. "You're here to fire me in person, some kind of PR stunt about how much the company cares." "No." Victoria's response was immediate. "No, Mr. Cole. I'm here to tell you the truth." "The truth about what?" "About what's been done to you. About how long it's been happening. About—" She took a breath, and Ethan saw her hands were shaking. "About how badly I've failed you." The words hung in the air between them. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the wall he'd built between himself and the company that employed him. He'd spent 2 years convinced that his exhaustion was normal, that his struggles were his own fault, that if he just worked harder, pushed further, sacrificed more, eventually things would improve. "I don't understand," he said. "I know, that's why I'm here." Victoria moved away from the sink, giving him space, respecting the invisible boundary he'd created. "May I sit? This is going to take some time." Ethan looked at his kitchen table, the same table where he and Lily ate cereal in the mornings when he managed to wake up before she left for school, where he sorted through bills he couldn't pay, where he'd fallen asleep more nights than he could count with his head on his arms and the weight of failure pressing down on his shoulders. "Sit," he said. Victoria pulled out one of the mismatched chairs and sat down with a careful precision that spoke of boardrooms and negotiations, of a woman who knew how to control every gesture. But her hands were still shaking. Ethan remained standing, couldn't sit, couldn't process this surreal violation of every boundary between their worlds. Victoria Hale, in his apartment, looking at him like he mattered. "3 months ago," Victoria began, her voice quiet but steady, "our internal auditing team flagged some inconsistencies in the distribution center's budget reports. Nothing dramatic, just small discrepancies that didn't quite add up. The kind of thing that usually turns out to be clerical errors or outdated software. But our new head of finance is extremely thorough, and she insisted on digging deeper." Ethan felt his exhaustion crystallizing into something sharper. Attention. "What she found," Victoria continued, "was a systematic pattern of theft and manipulation that had been going on for at least 2 years. Someone had been siphoning operational funds, falsifying labor reports, and creating phantom budget shortages to justify reduced staffing and increased mandatory overtime." The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, colder. "Who?" Ethan asked. "Your supervisor, Martin Reeves." The name landed like a physical blow. Martin Reeves, the man who controlled Ethan's schedule, who denied every request for time off, who looked at him with barely concealed contempt every time Ethan asked about the promotion he'd been promised. The man who told him last month that his performance was adequate but not exceptional, that he needed to demonstrate more commitment before any advancement could be considered. "He's been stealing from the company." "He's been stealing from everyone," Victoria said. "From Hale Industries, yes. But more importantly, from you. From every worker in that facility." She pulled a folder from the bag Ethan hadn't noticed beside her chair and set it on the table. "He created a shell system, reported that the distribution center was operating at reduced efficiency, that labor costs needed to be cut, used those reports to justify eliminating positions and forcing remaining workers into excessive overtime. Then he pocketed the difference between what the company allocated for staffing and what was actually being spent." Ethan's hands had curled into fists without him realizing it. "For 2 years? At minimum, possibly longer. We're still investigating." Victoria opened the folder, revealing pages of spreadsheets and reports that meant nothing to Ethan's untrained eyes. "But here's what I need you to understand, Mr. Cole. The money he was stealing, it wasn't just corporate funds. It was your time, your health, your life with your daughter." The mention of Lily made something crack in Ethan's chest. "According to the actual operational budget," Victoria continued, her voice dropping lower, "your facility should have had 12 additional staff members, which means you should have been working normal shifts, 8 hours, 5 days a week. Instead, you've been covering the workload of nearly 2 people because Martin Reeves convinced upper management that the center was overstaffed and underperforming." Ethan sat down. Couldn't keep standing. The numbers were spinning in his head, recalculating 2 years of his life. Every time you worked a 16-hour shift, Victoria said, every time you missed your daughter's bedtime, every time you were too exhausted to be present in your own life, it was because one man decided his greed was worth more than your humanity. Why? The word came out hoarse. Why are you telling me this? Why come here? Victoria met his eyes, and Ethan saw something in her expression that he'd never seen in any executive's face before. Real raw guilt. Because I built the system that made this possible, she said. I created a company culture that rewarded efficiency metrics over people. That promoted managers who cut costs without asking how those cuts were being achieved. That made workers like you invisible, except as numbers on a spreadsheet. She pressed her palms flat against the table. Martin Reeves is a thief and a monster, but I'm the one who gave him the tools to destroy your life. The admission hung in the air between them. Outside, Ethan heard the familiar sounds of the building. Mrs. Chen's television through the thin walls, the couple in 4A arguing about something he couldn't make out, the constant hum of the city that never quite went silent. You could have sent me an email, Ethan said, called me into an office. Had HR handle this. I could have, Victoria agreed. That's what my attorneys advised. What my board of directors would expect. Send a formal apology, offer a settlement, make the problem disappear behind legal paperwork and non-disclosure agreements. She shook her head. But I didn't want to hide behind corporate protocol. I wanted to look you in the eye and tell you that I'm sorry, that what happened to you was unconscionable, and that I intend to fix it. Ethan studied her face, looking for the performance, the calculated PR gesture, but all he saw was exhaustion that matched his own, and something that looked like genuine remorse. How? He asked. Martin Reeves will be terminated tomorrow morning. Criminal charges are being filed. The evidence is overwhelming. Every worker in your facility will receive back pay for the overtime they were forced to work, plus compensation for the exploitation they endured. Victoria pulled another document from the folder. But that's not enough. We're conducting a full audit of every facility in the company, implementing new oversight protocols, creating direct channels for workers to report concerns without going through their immediate supervisors. That's corporate reform, Ethan said. That's not fixing what happened to me. You're right. Victoria slid the document across the table. Which is why I'm here to offer you something more personal. Ethan picked up the paper. It was a job offer. Senior operations manager. Salary that made his current wages look like pocket change. Full benefits. Normal hours. Reporting directly to the regional director, not to anyone in the facility where he currently worked. You're offering me a promotion? Ethan heard the disbelief in his own voice. After telling me I've been exploited for 2 years, you think I want to stay with this company? I don't expect you to trust me, Victoria said. I don't expect you to believe that anything will change, but I'm asking you to give me the chance to prove it. She leaned forward slightly. You've spent 2 years doing work that should have been divided among multiple people. You've maintained operational efficiency under conditions that would have broken most workers. You've demonstrated leadership, resilience, and competence that went completely unrecognized because the man evaluating you was actively sabotaging your career. You don't know anything about my competence, Ethan said. You just know what some audit told you. I know what your coworkers told me, Victoria countered. I spent the last week conducting confidential interviews with everyone in your facility. Do you know what I heard? That you're the person they go to when machinery breaks down and maintenance is slow to respond. That you trained 3 new hires last year, even though training wasn't in your job description. That you stayed late, on your own time, to help a colleague who was struggling with the new inventory system. Ethan felt heat rising in his face. Those weren't things he'd done for recognition. They were just what you did. How you survived. You helped each other because no one else was going to help you. That's just basic human decency, he said. Exactly, Victoria replied. And that's exactly what's been missing from the way this company has treated you. Basic human decency. She stood up, giving him space again, reading his body language with an awareness that surprised him. I'm not asking you to make a decision tonight. I'm asking you to think about it. Read the offer. Take a few days. And if you decide you never want to hear from Hale Industries again, I will respect that completely. Ethan looked down at the job offer in his hands. The numbers blurred. 2 years of 16-hour shifts, 2 years of missing Lily's childhood, 2 years of believing he wasn't good enough, wasn't working hard enough, wasn't worth more than exhaustion and invisible sacrifice. Why did you clean my kitchen? The question came out of nowhere, but suddenly it was the only thing that mattered. Victoria paused at the edge of the kitchen, halfway to the door. Because I saw the drawings on your refrigerator, she said quietly. Your daughter's artwork, and I saw the dishes in the sink, the clutter that builds up when you're too tired to maintain your own space. And I thought about how much time you've lost, how many small moments of peace you've been denied because of my failure to protect you. She looked at him. I can't give you that time back, but I could clean a kitchen. It's inadequate and probably insulting, but it was something real I could do while I waited to tell you the truth. The honesty in her voice was almost harder to hear than the confession about Martin Reeves. I need to think, Ethan said. Of course. Victoria moved toward the door, then stopped. Mr. Cole, Ethan, I need you to know something else. This isn't about good PR or damage control. This is about the fact that I built a company that chewed you up and spit you out, and I didn't even know your name until 3 weeks ago. That's unforgivable. And I intend to spend however long it takes making sure it never happens to anyone else. She left quietly, the door closing with a soft click that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Ethan sat at his kitchen table, staring at the job offer, at the clean counters, at the dishes Victoria Hale had washed while waiting to destroy his understanding of the last 2 years of his life. The anger would come later, he knew. The real processing of what had been stolen from him. But right now, all he felt was a strange, hollow exhaustion that went deeper than physical tiredness. He heard a sound from the hallway. Soft footsteps. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing her eyes, her favorite stuffed rabbit dragging on the floor. Daddy? Her voice was sleepy, confused. I heard talking. Ethan's heart cracked open. Hey, sweetheart, I'm sorry I woke you. Who was that lady? Lily moved into the kitchen, and Ethan pulled her onto his lap, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. Just someone from work, he said. She cleaned the kitchen. Lily looked around with the observational skills of a 7-year-old. It looks nice. Yeah, Ethan said. Yeah, it does. Are you okay, Daddy? Lily turned to look at him, her small hand touching his face with a gentleness that made his throat tight. You look sad. I'm okay, baby. Just tired. You're always tired, Lily said, and the simple truth of it was more cutting than any accusation. Ethan held his daughter closer, feeling the weight of the job offer on the table, the weight of 2 stolen years, the weight of a truth he wasn't sure he wanted to accept. Maybe that's going to change, he whispered. Lily yawned, already drifting back toward sleep in his arms. That would be good. I miss you when you're tired. I miss me too, sweetheart. He carried her back to bed, tucked her in, watched her settle back into sleep with the easy resilience of childhood. Then he returned to the kitchen and read the job offer again. And again. The numbers were real, the position was real. But was the promise of change real? Or was this just another corporate manipulation, another way to buy his silence and make an inconvenient truth disappear? Ethan didn't know. Couldn't know. Not tonight. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Martin Reeves had stolen 2 years of his life. And Victoria Hale had just given him the first real choice he'd had in all that time. What he did with it would define everything that came next. The kitchen was clean, the apartment was quiet, and for the first time in 2 years, Ethan Cole allowed himself to imagine what it might feel like to stop surviving and start living. The job offer sat on the table, waiting, and in the silence of his small apartment, surrounded by his daughter's drawings and the faint scent of industrial cleaner Victoria Hale had used on his counters, Ethan began to believe that maybe, just maybe, some truths were worth the risk of hoping for something better. Morning came too quickly, pale sunlight filtering through the cheap blinds that never quite closed all the way. Ethan woke on the couch where he'd eventually collapsed around 3 in the morning. The job offer still clutched in his hand, creased now from hours of reading and rereading until the words blurred into meaningless shapes. Lily was already awake. He could hear her in the kitchen, The familiar sounds of a 7-year-old trying to be quiet and failing, cabinet doors opening too forcefully, the clink of a spoon against a bowl, her soft humming of some song she'd learned at school. Ethan pushed himself upright, his back protesting the awkward angle he'd slept in. The apartment looked different in daylight. The clean kitchen that had seemed surreal at midnight now felt like evidence of something he couldn't quite name, proof that last night had actually happened, that Victoria Hale had stood in his home and dismantled 2 years of his life with brutal honesty. "Morning, Daddy." Lily appeared in the doorway with a bowl of cereal, milk sloshing dangerously close to the rim. She'd gotten dressed herself. Mismatched socks, her shirt on backwards, but dressed. "You slept on the couch again." "Yeah, baby. I was up late thinking about work stuff." "Is everything okay?" She sat cross-legged on the floor in front of him, balancing her bowl with the concentration of a surgeon. "That lady who was here last night, is she your boss?" Ethan rubbed his face, trying to find words that would make sense to a child. "Sort of. She's the boss of everybody at my work." "That's a lot of people to be the boss of." "It is." "She seemed nice," Lily said, taking a bite of cereal. "She cleaned our kitchen really good. Mrs. Chen never cleans that good." The casual observation hit harder than it should have. Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor who watched Lily more nights than Ethan wanted to admit, who asked for almost nothing in return because she was lonely, and Lily made her laugh. Mrs. Chen, who represented every compromise Ethan had made, every piece of his daughter's childhood he'd outsourced to strangers because he was too exhausted to be present. "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "She did." "Are you going to see her again?" The question hung in the air between them. "I don't know yet, sweetheart." Lily finished her cereal in silence, a comfortable quiet that Ethan had learned meant she was thinking about something important. Finally, she set her bowl down and looked at him with those eyes that were so much like her mother's, clear, direct, seeing more than they should. "I hope you do," she said, "because maybe if you see her again, you won't have to work so much. And then you could take me to school sometimes instead of Mrs. Chen." The words were simple, honest, without accusation or manipulation. Just a child's hope that her father might someday be less tired, less absent, less worn down by a world she didn't yet understand. Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. "I love you, Lily. You know that, right?" "I know, Daddy." Her small arms wrapped around his neck. "I love you too, even when you're tired." Even when you're tired, as if his exhaustion was a fundamental part of who he was. As if she couldn't imagine a version of her father who came home with energy left over, who had time for homework help and bedtime stories and the 1,000 small moments that made up a childhood. That thought stayed with him through the morning routine, getting Lily ready for school, walking her to Mrs. Chen's apartment, watching her small hand wave goodbye as the door closed. It stayed with him on the bus to work, the job offer folded carefully in his jacket pocket like a secret he wasn't ready to share. It stayed with him when he walked through the gates of Hale Industries Distribution Center and saw Martin Reeves's office dark and empty. The whispers started immediately. Ethan heard them rippling through the warehouse floor, fragments of conversation, speculation, the nervous energy that came when routine shattered unexpectedly. Saw security escort him out. Something about an investigation. "My cousin works in HR. She said criminal charges." Ethan kept his head down, clocked in, moved toward his station with the muscle memory of 2 years' repetition. But Marcus Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen, just a coincidence in a city full of Chens, caught his arm. "Yo, Ethan, you hear about Reeves?" "Hear what?" The lie came easily. Safer to pretend ignorance than to explain that the CEO had been in his kitchen 12 hours ago. "Fired. Walked out in handcuffs this morning." Marcus's voice carried equal parts shock and satisfaction. Word is he was stealing from the company. Like serious theft, the kind that gets you actual prison time. Ethan felt the weight of the job offer in his pocket. "Anyone say what happens now? Who's taking over?" "Nobody knows. Regional sent some corporate people to run things temporarily." Marcus lowered his voice. "Dude, this is wild. Reeves ran this place like his personal kingdom for what, 3 years? 4? And now he's just gone." Yeah, Ethan said. Wild. The shift was different without Martin Reeves's presence. The corporate representatives who'd been sent to manage operations moved through the facility with clipboards and tight smiles, asking questions that felt designed to uncover more problems. Ethan kept his distance, focused on his work, tried not to think about Victoria's words echoing in his head. You should have been working normal shifts, 8 hours, 5 days a week. Every box he lifted felt heavier with that knowledge. Every minute that stretched past 8 hours felt like evidence of theft he'd been too blind to recognize. Lunch break came, and Ethan found himself sitting alone in the break room, the job offer spread on the table in front of him. The numbers still looked impossible. Senior operations manager, salary that would mean Lily could have new clothes instead of thrift store finds. That would mean he could take her to the movies, to the park, to all the places she saw other kids go with their parents. Mind if I join you? Ethan looked up to find Thomas Wright sliding into the seat across from him. Thomas was older, mid-50s, had been working at the facility longer than anyone else. He had the quiet authority of someone who'd seen every kind of management change and learned to survive them all. Free country, Ethan said, folding the job offer quickly. Thomas noticed but didn't comment. Hell of a day. Yeah. You know what I keep thinking about? Thomas opened his lunch container, revealing leftovers that smelled like home cooking. I keep thinking about all the times Reeves told us we were underperforming, that we needed to work harder, faster, longer, that the company was struggling and we all needed to sacrifice. He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and the whole time he was pocketing the money that should have gone to hiring more staff. You sound like you're not surprised, Ethan said. I'm not. Thomas met his eyes. I've been in this industry 30 years. I've seen every kind of exploitation there is. What surprises me is that someone actually did something about it. What do you mean? Usually these things get buried. Quiet settlements, non-disclosure agreements. Problem disappears and nothing changes. Thomas leaned back in his chair. But this? Public termination, criminal charges, corporate investigators crawling all over the facility? That's not normal. That's someone in power deciding to actually fix the problem instead of just managing the optics. Ethan thought about Victoria in his kitchen, her hands shaking as she confessed her complicity. That wasn't managing optics. That was something else entirely. You think things will actually change? Ethan asked. Depends. Thomas studied him with the careful assessment of someone who'd learned to read people for survival. Depends on whether the people who are hurt by this system are willing to help build something better, or whether they're too angry, too tired, too broken to believe change is possible. The words felt pointed, deliberate. You know something. I know that 3 different corporate reps asked me about you today, Thomas said. Asked if you were reliable, if you had leadership potential, if other workers respected you. He paused. I told them yes to all 3. Was I right? Ethan's hand went to his pocket, felt the folded job offer through the fabric. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. Thomas smiled slightly. But if someone were to offer you an opportunity to move up, to get out of the hell Reeves created, I hope you'd think real hard before turning it down. Because guys like us, we don't get a lot of second chances. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. Ethan moved through his tasks mechanically, his mind churning through possibilities and fears in equal measure. At 6 o'clock, 6, not the usual midnight finish, one of the corporate representatives found him. Mr. Cole, I'm Sarah Hendricks, VP of Operations. Do you have a few minutes? She was in her 40s, professional but not cold, with the kind of direct gaze that suggested she didn't waste time on corporate games. Ethan followed her to what had been Martin Reeves' office, now stripped of personal effects, sterile and impersonal. I'll be direct, Sarah said, closing the door. Victoria Hale asked me to check in with you. See how you're processing everything, answer any questions you might have about the offer she extended. She told you about that? She told me what happened to you, what Martin Reeves did. Sarah's expression hardened. I've been conducting similar investigations at 3 other facilities. What we're finding is a pattern of exploitation that should have been caught years ago, but the metrics look good on paper, and no one bothered to dig deeper. So this is happening other places too, Ethan said. Not just here. Yes, which is why Victoria wants to build a new operational structure and why she wants people who actually understand what it's like to work in these facilities to be part of that structure. Sarah leaned against the desk. The job she offered you isn't charity, Mr. Cole. It's strategic. She needs people who won't perpetuate the same systems that allowed this abuse to happen. Ethan looked around the office, thinking about all the times he'd stood on the other side of this desk, asking Martin Reeves for time off, for schedule adjustments, for the promotion he'd been promised. All the times he'd been told no with barely concealed contempt. I don't have management experience, he said. You have something better. You have credibility with the workers who've been exploited. You understand the systems from the inside. Sarah pulled out a tablet, tapped through several screens. I've reviewed your employment record, your actual performance evaluations, not the falsified ones Reeves submitted. You've exceeded every metric consistently for 2 years. You've trained new employees, solved operational problems, maintained equipment. You've done everything a senior manager should do, just without the title or compensation. That's just survival, Ethan said. That's what you do when you can't afford to get fired. Exactly, Sarah replied, which is exactly the perspective we need in leadership. Someone who understands that workers aren't abstract numbers. They're people with lives and families and limits. The words echoed Victoria's from the night before, but hearing them from someone else, someone who worked in the system day to day, made them feel more real. What would I actually be doing? Ethan asked. Sarah's expression shifted into something that might have been respect. Working with me to redesign operational protocols across all distribution facilities, implementing new oversight systems, training managers on ethical leadership, basically making sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else. She paused. It's going to be hard work. You'll face resistance from people who like the old system because it made them money, but you'll also have the full support of executive leadership and legal. Why does Victoria care so much? The question came out before Ethan could stop it. She's a billionaire CEO. She could just pay settlements and move on. Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. I've worked with Victoria for 8 years. I've seen her make ruthless business decisions, prioritize profits over people, build a company culture that valued efficiency above everything else. But I've also seen her face the consequences of those decisions. She met Ethan's eyes. 3 months ago, her father died. He was the founder of this company, and his last words to her were that she'd lost sight of why he built it in the first place, to create good jobs that treated people with dignity. The human detail surprised Ethan, made Victoria Hale less of an abstract figure and more of a person carrying her own guilt. So this is about her making peace with her dad? Ethan asked. This is about her making peace with herself, Sarah corrected. Your situation was the catalyst, but it's not about you specifically. It's about the fact that she built a system that made your exploitation possible, and she can't pretend she didn't know better. Sarah closed her tablet. She's not a saint, Mr. Cole. She's a woman who made terrible choices and is trying to fix them. Whether you choose to be part of that process is entirely up to you. Ethan left the facility that evening at 6:30, the earliest he'd left work in 2 years. The sunlight felt strange, unfamiliar. He caught a bus that he'd never taken before, one that ran during daylight hours, and watched the city pass by with the disorienting sense that he was seeing it for the first time. He picked Lily up from Mrs. Chen's apartment before dinner. His daughter's surprise was heartbreaking in its intensity. "Daddy, you're here!" She launched herself at him with the full force of 7-year-old excitement. "It's still light outside." "I know, baby. I got off work early today. Can we go to the park?" The hope in her voice was almost painful to hear. Ethan looked at Mrs. Chen, who smiled and nodded. "Go. Enjoy the evening. You deserve it." They went to the small park 3 blocks from their apartment building, the one Ethan passed every day on his way to the bus, but never had time to actually visit. Lily ran to the swings, her laughter bright and clear in the evening air. Ethan pushed her, feeling the simple rhythm of the motion, watching her joy build with each arc through the air. "Higher, Daddy, higher!" He pushed harder, and she squealed with delight, her hair flying behind her. Other parents were there with their children, mothers and fathers who'd picked up their kids after normal work hours, who had energy for playgrounds and homework help and the ordinary magic of childhood. Ethan had forgotten what this felt like, had forgotten that parenting could be more than exhausted goodnight kisses and apologies for absence. "Daddy, look!" Lily jumped off the swing mid-arc, landing with practiced ease and running toward the slide. "Watch me." "I'm watching, sweetheart." And he was. For the first time in months, maybe years, he was fully present, not thinking about the next shift, the next bill, the next impossible demand, just watching his daughter play, her joy uncomplicated and pure. They stayed until the sun started setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Lily finally wore herself out and collapsed on a bench beside Ethan, her head resting against his arm. "This was the best day," she said. "Yeah?" "Yeah, you weren't tired. We got to play together." She looked up at him, her face serious. "I wish every day could be like this." Ethan felt something break open in his chest. "Me too, baby. Me too." That night, after Lily was asleep, Ethan sat at his kitchen table with the job offer in front of him. He thought about Thomas's words. "Guys like us don't get a lot of second chances." He thought about Sarah's explanation of what the job would actually mean, the work of rebuilding systems that had been designed to exploit people like him. He thought about Victoria Hale in his kitchen at midnight, washing dishes while she waited to confess her failures. But mostly, he thought about Lily's face at the park. The pure joy of having her father present and awake and able to push her on the swings. The simple declaration that this had been the best day. Ethan pulled out his phone, found the number Victoria had written at the bottom of the job offer. His thumb hovered over the screen for a long moment. Then he typed, "I want to talk, but not in an office, somewhere neutral, just the two of us." The response came faster than he expected. "Name the place. I'll be there." He suggested a coffee shop near his apartment, a quiet place he'd walked past 1,000 times but never had time to visit. Tomorrow morning, before the facilities shift that he might or might not return to. Victoria's reply was simple. "Thank you. I'll see you then." Ethan set his phone down and looked around his kitchen. The clean counters, the organized dish rack, the drawings on the refrigerator that represented every moment of Lily's life he'd missed while working shifts that should never have existed. He didn't know if he could trust Victoria Hale. Didn't know if corporate reform was real or just another elaborate performance. Didn't know if accepting this job would mean selling out his principles or finally getting the chance to change the system from the inside. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was done surviving, done accepting exploitation as inevitable, done telling his daughter that exhaustion was normal. Tomorrow, he would meet with Victoria. He would ask the hard questions, and he would decide whether redemption was possible for both of them. The job offer sat on the table, no longer just a piece of paper, but a possibility. A door that had been closed for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to have choices. Ethan went to bed that night thinking about swings and sunlight and the radical notion that maybe, just maybe, he deserved something better than the life Martin Reeves had designed for him. And in the morning, he would find out if Victoria Hale was willing to prove that her words meant something more than damage control. The coffee shop was called Riverside Brew, tucked between a laundromat and a bookstore that had been going out of business for as long as Ethan could remember. He'd passed it countless times on early morning commutes, always moving too fast to notice the warm light spilling from its windows, the small tables where people sat with newspapers and laptops, living lives that seemed impossibly leisurely compared to his own frantic schedule. Now, standing outside at 7:30 in the morning, with 20 minutes before Victoria was supposed to arrive, Ethan felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He could still walk away. Could text her that he'd changed his mind, that he wanted nothing to do with Hale Industries or its promises of reform. Could go back to the warehouse, put in his 2 weeks' notice, find some other minimum wage job that would grind him down just as thoroughly, but without the complicated burden of hope. The door opened and a woman emerged with a coffee cup, steam rising in the cool morning air. She smiled at him automatically, the reflexive kindness of strangers, and moved past. Ethan went inside. The shop was small, maybe a dozen tables, with worn hardwood floors and walls covered in local artwork that probably never sold. A young barista with purple hair and multiple piercings looked up from wiping down the espresso machine. "Morning. What can I get you?" "Just coffee." "Black." Ethan pulled out his wallet, counting bills that suddenly felt more precious, knowing he might be making a choice that would change what money meant in his life. "$3.50. He paid, took his coffee to a table near the window where he could see the street, and waited. The coffee was better than the break room sludge at work, rich and dark without the metallic aftertaste he'd gotten used to. Small pleasure, but real. 7:40. 7:45. Ethan watched people pass by outside. A man walking 3 dogs, a woman in scrubs heading toward the hospital 2 blocks over, a teenager skateboarding with the careless confidence of someone who didn't yet understand how quickly the world could break you. At 7:50, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. Not a limousine, not some ostentatious display of wealth, but still obviously expensive in the way it moved, the way it took up space. Victoria Hale stepped out, alone, no driver visible. She was dressed simply again, jeans, a sweater, sunglasses that she removed as she entered the coffee shop. She saw Ethan immediately and walked over, and he noticed the other patrons noticing her. Not because she looked like a CEO, but because she carried herself with a certainty that made people look twice. "Thank you for meeting me," Victoria said, not sitting yet, waiting for some signal that she was welcome. "Sit," Ethan said. She did, setting her bag carefully on the floor. "Can I get you anything? Food, another coffee?" "I'm fine." Victoria nodded, seemed to recognize that pleasantries weren't going to ease into this conversation. "You have questions. Ask them." Ethan appreciated the directness. "Why me? Specifically me? Sarah said you're reforming the whole company, investigating multiple facilities. There have to be dozens of workers who were exploited the same way I was. Why offer me this position?" "Because of what Thomas Wright told the investigators," Victoria said. "Because when we interviewed your co-workers, every single one of them mentioned your name. Not because you were a supervisor, but because you were the person they trusted, the one who helped when no one else would." She leaned forward slightly. "I need people in leadership who understand that trust is earned, not demanded. Who've experienced what it's like to be invisible to the people making decisions about your life." "That's not a qualification," Ethan said. "That's just survival." "Exactly. And most people in management have never had to survive the systems they're designing." Victoria's voice was steady, matter of fact. "I need someone who won't forget what it feels like to be powerless. Someone who'll recognize exploitation when they see it because they've lived it." Ethan took a drink of coffee, buying time to organize thoughts that felt too large for words. "You're asking me to trust that you've changed, that the woman who built a system that destroyed people's lives suddenly cares about making things better." "I'm not asking you to trust me," Victoria said. "I'm asking you to verify. The reforms I'm implementing, they're not dependent on your participation. They're happening regardless. Audit protocols, direct reporting channels, mandatory oversight. I've already committed to congressional testimony about labor practices in the industry. This isn't empty promises." Congressional testimony? Ethan hadn't expected that. "The labor violations we uncovered go beyond just my company. The Department of Labor is investigating similar practices across the sector." Victoria's expression was grim. Martin Reeves wasn't an isolated case. He was a symptom of an entire industry that's been exploiting workers for decades. And I'm not going to pretend Hale Industries is innocent. The admission surprised Ethan. Corporate executives didn't usually volunteer information that made them look bad. "You're going to testify against your own company?" "I'm going to testify about the truth," Victoria corrected, "which includes the ways I failed to protect workers, the ways I prioritized shareholder value over human dignity, the ways I told myself that efficiency metrics were more important than asking how those metrics were achieved." She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, turned it toward Ethan. It was an email, dated 3 days ago, to someone named Senator Patricia Morrison. Ethan read the first paragraph. Victoria's words were blunt, unsparing, admitting to systemic failures and requesting a formal investigation. This wasn't damage control. This was someone burning down her own reputation deliberately. "This will destroy your credibility," Ethan said. "My credibility was built on a lie," Victoria replied. "That you can build a successful company without caring about the people who make that success possible. I'd rather lose my reputation than continue perpetuating that lie." The purple-haired barista approached with a hesitant smile. "Sorry to interrupt, but we close the back section in 10 minutes for a private event. You're welcome to stay up front." "Thank you," Victoria said, and waited until the barista left before continuing. I know you don't owe me anything, Ethan. I know that accepting this job means risking that I'm just another executive making promises I won't keep, but I'm asking you to consider that maybe you're not just taking a risk on me. Maybe this is you taking a risk on yourself. What does that mean? It means that for 2 years, Martin Reeves convinced you that you weren't good enough, that your exhaustion was normal, that your struggle to provide for your daughter was your own failure. Victoria's voice dropped lower. And I think part of you still believes that. Part of you thinks you don't deserve this job, that you're not qualified, that someone will eventually figure out you're not really management material. The words hit harder because they were true. Ethan had spent 2 years internalizing failure, believing that his inability to get ahead was a personal weakness rather than systematic exploitation. I worked with what I had, Ethan said quietly. You worked with what Martin Reeves left you after stealing everything else, Victoria countered. And you still maintained operational efficiency, still helped your coworkers, still showed up every single day, even when you had every reason to quit. That's not someone who's not qualified. That's someone who's been denied the opportunity to show what they're actually capable of. Before Ethan could respond, the door opened and Lily walked in. For a moment, Ethan's brain couldn't process what he was seeing. His daughter, who should have been at Mrs. Chen's apartment getting ready for school, was standing in the doorway of Riverside Brew, looking around with wide eyes. Lily. Ethan stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. What are you doing here? Where's Mrs. Chen? She's outside. Lily spotted Victoria, and her face lit up with recognition. Oh, it's the kitchen lady. Mrs. Chen appeared behind Lily, breathless and apologetic. I'm so sorry, Ethan. She saw you leave this morning and insisted on following. I tried to stop her, but she's very determined. Ethan moved toward his daughter, his heart still racing from the shock. Lily, you can't just follow me. You scared me. I'm sorry, Daddy. But she didn't look particularly sorry. She looked curious, her attention fixed on Victoria. Are you having a meeting with the kitchen lady? Victoria had stood as well, and Ethan saw something cross her face. Surprise, certainly, but also something else. A softness that didn't match the corporate executive he'd been talking to moments before. Hi, Lily, Victoria said gently. Yes, your dad and I are having a meeting. It's nice to see you again. You remembered my name, Lily said, impressed. Of course I did. Mrs. Chen looked between the adults, clearly trying to assess whether she should remove Lily immediately or wait for instructions. Ethan felt the careful structure of this conversation collapsing, the professional distance he'd been maintaining suddenly irrelevant in the face of his daughter's presence. Mrs. Chen, it's okay, Ethan said. Can you just give us a few minutes? Of course. Lily and I will wait outside. Mrs. Chen reached for Lily's hand, but Lily had already moved closer to the table, her child's directness cutting through adult politeness. Are you making my daddy not tired anymore? Lily asked Victoria. The question stopped everyone. Victoria looked at this small girl with her backward shirt and mismatched socks, and Ethan saw something shift in her expression. The professional composure cracked, revealing something raw underneath. I'm trying to, Victoria said quietly. Your daddy's been working very hard for a long time, and I want to help make things better for him. Good, Lily said with the simple certainty of childhood. Because he's always tired, and it makes me sad. The words hung in the air like an accusation, more powerful than anything Ethan could have said himself. This was what exploitation looked like from the other side, not in budget reports or efficiency metrics, but in a 7-year-old girl who'd learned to measure her father's presence by his exhaustion level. Victoria's eyes were bright suddenly, and Ethan realized with shock that she was holding back tears. Lily, Ethan said gently, why don't you go with Mrs. Chen? I'll be home soon, okay? Okay, Daddy. Lily turned back to Victoria. Bye, kitchen lady. Thank you for trying to help my daddy. You're welcome, sweetheart. Mrs. Chen guided Lily out, apologizing again with her eyes. The door closed, and silence settled over the coffee shop. Victoria sat down slowly, her hands gripping the edge of the table like she needed something solid to hold on to. I'm sorry, Ethan said. She shouldn't have interrupted. No, Victoria's voice was thick. No, I'm glad she did. She took a breath, visibly collecting herself. I've spent 3 months looking at numbers, reading reports, conducting interviews, trying to understand the impact of what I built. But that, she gestured toward the door where Lily had disappeared. That's the reality I've been avoiding. A child who measures her father's worth by how tired he is. It's not your fault that it is, Victoria interrupted. It absolutely is. I created a system where Martin Reeves could thrive, where supervisors were rewarded for cutting costs without anyone asking about the human cost, where workers were invisible except as productivity metrics. She looked at Ethan directly. Your daughter's sadness is a direct result of my choices, and I can't make that right with corporate reforms or better oversight. I can only try to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else's child. The honesty was almost painful to hear. Ethan had expected defensiveness, corporate speak, carefully crafted responses designed to deflect responsibility. Instead, he was watching someone genuinely grapple with the consequences of their actions. She called you the kitchen lady, Ethan said, because he didn't know how else to respond to such raw admission. Victoria managed a small smile. I've been called worse in boardrooms. Why did you really clean my kitchen? The question had been nagging at Ethan since that first night. The truth, not the explanation you gave about needing something to do with your hands. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring at her coffee cup. Because I saw your daughter's drawings on the refrigerator, and I realized I don't have anything like that in my life. No artwork from children, no evidence that I've built anything that matters beyond quarterly earnings reports. She looked up. I'm 43 years old, I've built a billion-dollar company, and the most human connection I've made in years is washing dishes in a stranger's kitchen while waiting to confess my failures. The vulnerability in her voice was startling. This wasn't CEO Victoria Hale. This was just Victoria, a woman who'd achieved everything society told her mattered and realized too late that she'd sacrificed everything that actually did. That's why you're doing all this, Ethan said slowly. The reforms, the testimony, offering me this job. It's not about the company. It's about you trying to figure out who you are when you stop being successful. Maybe, Victoria admitted, or maybe it's about realizing that success built on other people's suffering isn't success at all. It's just exploitation with better PR. The barista approached again, apologetic. I'm really sorry, but we need to close this section now. You can move to the front if you'd like to keep talking. They gathered their things and moved to a smaller table near the window. Outside, Ethan could see Mrs. Chen and Lily on a bench, Lily swinging her legs and talking animatedly about something. His daughter. The reason he'd survived 2 years of exploitation. The reason he was sitting here now, trying to decide if hope was worth the risk of disappointment. I want to see the reforms, Ethan said once they were settled. Not in theory, in practice. I want to visit the facilities where you're implementing new protocols. Talk to the workers, see if the changes are real or just cosmetic. Done, Victoria said immediately. I'll arrange access to any facility you want to visit. You can talk to anyone, review any documentation, complete transparency. And I want protection, Ethan continued. If I take this job and then speak out about problems I see, I need to know I won't be fired or blacklisted. I need it in writing, in my contract, enforceable and specific. I'll have legal draft whistleblower protections into your employment agreement. Ironclad language. Victoria pulled out her phone, typed a note. What else? I want to bring Thomas Wright with me, Ethan said. The idea had formed as he was speaking, suddenly clear. If you want someone who understands these systems, who has credibility with workers, you need him too, not under me, as a partner, equal authority. Victoria looked up from her phone, surprise crossing her face. Thomas Wright? The one who's been at your facility for 30 years? He's seen every kind of management failure. He knows how these systems work from the ground up, and workers trust him even more than they trust me. Ethan leaned forward. You want to build something real? You need people who've survived long enough to understand what actually works versus what looks good in a PowerPoint presentation. A smile touched Victoria's face, genuine this time. You haven't even accepted the job yet, and you're already negotiating for someone else's advancement. That's exactly the kind of leadership I need. That's not leadership, Ethan said. That's remembering that I'm not the only person who was exploited, and I'm not going to be part of a system that advances me while leaving everyone else behind. I'll make the offer to Thomas, Victoria said. Same level as you. Operational reform partners. You'll work together to redesign protocols across all facilities. They talked for another hour, working through details that made the abstract offer concrete. Salary negotiations. Victoria's initial offer was generous, but Ethan pushed for more, thinking about Lily's future, about college funds and emergency savings, and the security he'd never had. Benefits, schedule flexibility, clear boundaries around work hours. Victoria agreed to everything, her phone filling with notes that would become contract language. Finally, Ethan sat back, his coffee long cold, and looked at this woman who'd invaded his kitchen and upended his understanding of his own life. "I need time," he said. "Not weeks, but a few days. I need to process this without the pressure of an immediate decision." "Take whatever time you need," Victoria said. And Ethan, she hesitated, then continued. "Regardless of what you decide, the back pay and compensation for the exploitation you suffered will be processed. That's not contingent on your employment. That's basic justice." "How much?" Ethan asked. Victoria told him. The number made his stomach drop. 2 years of stolen overtime, calculated at proper rates, compensation for lost promotional opportunities, punitive damages. It was more money than Ethan had seen in his entire life. He couldn't finish the sentence. "That's what you're owed," Victoria said firmly. "Martin Reeves stole from you. This is restitution, not charity." Ethan thought about Lily on the bench outside. Thought about what that money could mean: stability, options, the ability to make choices based on what was right rather than what was financially necessary. "I'll give you my answer in 3 days," he said. "Fair enough?" Victoria stood, extending her hand. Ethan shook it, feeling the grip, firm, respectful, the handshake of equals rather than executive and employee. She left, and Ethan watched through the window as she got into her car and drove away. Then he went outside to where Mrs. Chen and Lily waited. "Is everything okay?" Mrs. Chen asked quietly. "Yeah," Ethan said. "Everything's okay." Lily jumped off the bench and took his hand. "Did the kitchen lady make you not tired?" "She's trying to, baby." "Good, I like her." Lily swung his arm as they walked. "She has sad eyes, though. Like she's tired too, but different tired than you." The observation was startlingly perceptive. "Yeah, sweetheart. Different tired. Maybe if you help each other, you'll both be less tired." Ethan looked down at his daughter, this small person with her backward shirt and enormous heart, and felt something shift in his chest. Maybe she was right. Maybe this wasn't about trust or risk or corporate reform. Maybe it was about two people who'd been exhausted by different kinds of success, recognizing that they both needed to change. That evening, after Lily was asleep, Ethan called Thomas Wright. "Ethan," Thomas answered, television noise in the background. "This is a surprise. Everything okay?" "I need your advice," Ethan said, "and I need you to be completely honest with me, even if you think it's not what I want to hear." "All right, shoot." Ethan told him everything: the job offer, the meeting with Victoria, the conversation about bringing Thomas in as a partner. He laid it all out without embellishment, without trying to make it sound better or worse than it was. Thomas was quiet for a long time after Ethan finished. Finally, he said, "You want to know if it's real or if you're being played?" "Yeah." "Honest answer? I don't know. Could be both." Thomas paused. "But here's what I do know. Real reform takes people willing to risk that it might fail. Takes someone being brave enough to walk into a system that exploited them and try to change it from the inside." "That sounds like you think I should take it," Ethan said. "I think you should do whatever lets you look your daughter in the eye and feel like you're building something worth her inheriting," Thomas replied. "Whether that's this job or walking away and finding something else entirely. But don't turn it down because you're afraid of being disappointed. You've already survived worse than disappointment." The wisdom in those words settled over Ethan like a weight. He'd survived exploitation, grief, poverty, exhaustion that should have broken him. Disappointment was just another kind of survival. "Will you do it?" Ethan asked. "If I say yes, will you come with me?" Thomas laughed, short and surprised. "You're really asking a 60-year-old warehouse worker to become a corporate reform partner." "I'm asking someone who's seen 30 years of failure to help build something better." "Then, yeah," Thomas said. Yeah, if you're crazy enough to try, I'm crazy enough to help. They talked for another hour, working through fears and possibilities in equal measure. When Ethan finally hung up, he felt lighter than he had in days. Not certain, he still didn't know if he could trust Victoria, still didn't know if corporate reform was real or performative, but he knew he wasn't alone in this decision. 3 days later, Ethan walked into Victoria's office, the real one, in the gleaming corporate tower he'd only ever seen from the outside. She was waiting with Sarah Hendricks and a lawyer, contracts printed and ready for signature. Ethan sat down, read every word of the employment agreement, the whistleblower protections, the compensation package. Everything they discussed was there, formalized into legal language that made promises enforceable. He signed, so did Victoria. "Welcome to the team," she said, and Ethan heard something in her voice that sounded like relief. Like maybe she'd been as uncertain as he was about whether this would happen. "Don't make me regret this," Ethan said. Victoria met his eyes with an honesty that still surprised him. "I'm going to try very hard not to." The transition from warehouse floor to corporate office happened faster than Ethan expected, and yet every day felt impossibly slow. His first week was a blur of orientations and introductions, of learning systems that had been invisible to him when he was just a number on a productivity report. Sarah Hendricks walked him through operational databases that tracked every facility in the company, showed him the metrics that management used to make decisions, explained the gap between what the numbers said and what was actually happening on the ground. "This is where Martin Reeves manipulated the data," Sarah said, pointing to a screen filled with color-coded spreadsheets. "He reported reduced efficiency here, which justified cutting staff here, which created the budget surplus he was stealing here." Ethan stared at the numbers, feeling a strange disconnection between the abstract data and the lived reality it represented. Each reduced percentage point was a worker forced into double shifts. Each budget adjustment was someone missing their kid's soccer game, their parents' birthday, their own life. "How many other facilities have this pattern?" he asked. "We've identified irregularities at 6 locations so far," Sarah replied. "But we're only 3 weeks into a company-wide audit. The more we dig, the more we find." Thomas started the same week, and his presence made everything feel more real. They shared an office, Sarah's idea, to reinforce that they were partners rather than hierarchical. Thomas spent his first day just staring at the view from their 20th floor window, shaking his head in disbelief. 30 years I worked in warehouses," he said. "Never once saw the inside of corporate. Never once got asked what I thought about how things should run." "Well, they're asking now," Ethan replied. "Yeah, question is whether they'll actually listen." The question haunted Ethan through those early weeks. He and Thomas attended meetings where executives discussed labor costs with the same emotional detachment someone might use to talk about office supplies. They sat through presentations where efficiency consultants recommended reducing break times and increasing productivity quotas, all backed by data that looked convincing until you remembered that data represented actual human beings. In one particularly tense meeting, a regional director named Marcus Kelly pushed back hard against the proposed reforms. "With all due respect," Marcus said, his tone making it clear he had none, "we're implementing changes that will significantly impact our operational margins based on what appears to be an emotional response to a few bad actors. Martin Reeves was an anomaly. The system itself is sound." Ethan felt Thomas tense beside him. Before either of them could respond, Victoria's voice cut through the room with surgical precision. "Martin Reeves was a symptom, not an anomaly," she said. "And if you believe the system is sound, Marcus, I invite you to spend a week working on a distribution floor under current conditions. No corporate credentials, no special treatment. Just do the job the way our workers do it every day." Marcus's face reddened. "That's not a reasonable comparison. I'm not trained for warehouse work." "Exactly," Victoria replied. "You're not trained for it, yet you feel qualified to make decisions about how it should be performed. That's the problem we're solving." The room went silent. Ethan watched Marcus struggle with whether to push back further, saw him calculate the political cost of challenging Victoria directly, watched him choose retreat. "I'll review the proposed changes more carefully," Marcus said finally. "See that you do," Victoria replied, then turned to Ethan. "What's your assessment of the facility restructuring proposal?" Ethan had been reviewing the document for 3 days, cross-referencing it with his lived experience of warehouse operations. "It's a good start," he said carefully, "but it focuses too much on top-down oversight and not enough on worker agency. We're adding more supervisors to watch for problems instead of creating systems where workers can address problems themselves." "Explain," Victoria said. "Right now, if a worker sees a safety issue or an operational inefficiency, they have to report it up through 3 levels of management before anything happens. By the time it gets addressed, if it gets addressed, someone's usually been injured or productivity has dropped." Ethan pulled up his own notes on his tablet. "What if we created worker-led safety committees with direct authority to pause operations and implement immediate fixes? What if we gave floor teams budget authority to address equipment maintenance without waiting for management approval?" Marcus Kelly laughed, actually laughed. "You want to give warehouse workers budget authority? That's absurd." "Why?" Thomas spoke for the first time, his voice calm but hard. "You think we're too stupid to make good decisions with money? I think you lack the training and perspective of working with broken equipment while management ignores your reports for 6 months, Thomas interrupted. "I've seen workers jury-rig solutions to problems that would have cost the company thousands if we'd waited for proper channels. Turns out people who actually do the work know how to fix it better than people who just read reports about it." The tension in the room crystallized. This was the real fight, Ethan realized. Not about Martin Reeves or budget theft, but about who got to have authority, whose knowledge counted as legitimate, whether workers could be trusted to make decisions about their own labor. Victoria looked at Marcus. "Implement a pilot program at 3 facilities, worker-led safety committees with pause authority and a limited equipment maintenance budget. We'll run it for 6 months and compare metrics to similar facilities without the program." "Victoria, I really think that wasn't a suggestion, Marcus." After the meeting, Ethan and Thomas walked back to their office in silence. Ethan felt the weight of what had just happened, the public challenge to established hierarchy, the implicit trust Victoria had placed in their perspective, the enemies they were making by insisting that workers deserved agency. "We're going to make a lot of people angry," Thomas said finally. "Yeah," Ethan agreed. "We are." "Good. About time someone did." The weeks turned into months. The pilot programs launched. Ethan and Thomas traveled to facilities across the region, talking to workers, observing operations, documenting the gap between policy and practice. What they found was both worse and better than expected. Worse because the exploitation was more widespread than initial audits suggested. Better because workers, when given actual authority and resources, proved remarkably capable of solving their own problems. At a facility in Ohio, the Worker-Led Safety Committee identified and fixed a ventilation issue that management had been ignoring for 2 years. Productivity increased 15% because workers weren't getting sick from poor air quality. At a distribution center in Texas, floor teams used their equipment budget to repair conveyor systems that had been malfunctioning for months. Downtime dropped by 20%. At a warehouse in Oregon, workers redesigned their own break schedule to better match operational flow, improving both efficiency and worker satisfaction. Ethan documented everything, built presentations that combined data with worker testimony, made the abstract numbers feel human, and slowly, reluctantly, corporate leadership started to listen. But success created its own complications. The more visible Ethan became within the company, the less time he had for Lily. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd taken this job partly to spend more time with his daughter, and now he was traveling 3 weeks out of every month, coming home exhausted from different work, but exhausted nonetheless. One Friday evening, he arrived home after a particularly brutal week in Baltimore to find Lily crying at the kitchen table, a school project spread in front of her. "Hey, baby, what's wrong?" Ethan dropped his bag and moved to her side. "I needed your help," Lily said through tears. "Mrs. Chen tried, but she didn't understand. And you weren't here." Guilt hit like a physical blow. "What's the project?" "We had to interview someone about their job. Everyone else interviewed their parents, but you were gone, so I couldn't." Ethan looked at the half-finished worksheet, questions about daily responsibilities and career goals left blank. He pulled Lily into his arms, feeling her small body shake with frustrated sobs. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I should have been here. You're always gone now. Lily said. You said the new job would make you less tired, but you're still tired. You're just tired in different places. The accusation was devastating in its accuracy. Ethan had escaped one form of exploitation only to volunteer for another, more insidious kind. He'd convinced himself that traveling for work was different from warehouse shifts because the cause was noble, because he was helping people, because the exhaustion had meaning. But to Lily, absence was absence regardless of the justification. You're right, Ethan said quietly. You're absolutely right, and I don't have a good excuse. I just want you to be home, Daddy. I don't care about your important job. I just want you. The words broke something open in Ethan's chest. He held his daughter, feeling the weight of every choice he'd made, every compromise he'd accepted in the name of doing good work. And he realized that he was in danger of becoming exactly the kind of person he'd been fighting against, someone who sacrificed the human for the abstract, who let noble goals justify personal failures. That night, after Lily was asleep, Ethan called Victoria. She answered on the second ring, sounding tired herself. Ethan, is everything okay? No, he said. We need to talk about the travel schedule. All right, what's the issue? The issue is that I took this job so I could be present in my daughter's life, and instead I'm gone more than I ever was at the warehouse. Different kind of absence, but she doesn't care about the difference. She just knows her father isn't there. Victoria was quiet for a moment. You're right, I should have anticipated this. The scope of the reform project expanded faster than we planned. I need to cut back, Ethan said. Significantly. I can't keep traveling 3 weeks a month. I won't do that to Lily again. What do you need? The question surprised him. No pushback, no negotiation, just immediate acknowledgement that his concern was valid. I need to be home 4 nights a week minimum, Ethan said, and I need to be present for school events, parent-teacher conferences, the stuff that matters to a 7-year-old. The work is important, but it can't be everything. Done, Victoria said. We'll restructure the travel requirements. Hire additional support staff to cover facility visits. Make sure you have actual work-life balance instead of just theoretical boundaries. Just like that? Ethan had expected resistance. Just like that, Victoria confirmed. Ethan, the whole point of this reform is to ensure that work doesn't destroy people's lives. If I'm asking you to sacrifice your relationship with your daughter for this project, then I've learned nothing. She paused. How is Lily? She's 7. She shouldn't have to feel like she's competing with her father's job for his attention. No, Victoria agreed quietly. She shouldn't. There was something in her voice, a weight that suggested she was thinking about more than just Ethan's situation. Victoria, when was the last time you took a day off? I don't know, a while. When was the last time you did something that wasn't work-related? Silence. Victoria? I'm not good at this, she said finally. At being a person instead of a CEO. I've built my entire identity around the company. When I'm not working, I don't know who I am. The admission was startling in its vulnerability. That's not healthy. I know, intellectually I know, but knowing and changing are different things. Victoria sighed. I've been thinking about what your daughter said, that I have sad eyes, different tired than you. She's perceptive, Ethan said. She's right. I am tired. Tired of performing competence, tired of board meetings and shareholder calls, tired of measuring my worth by quarterly earnings reports. Victoria's voice dropped lower. I'm 43 years old and I don't have anyone in my life who would notice if I disappeared for a week. No family dinners to miss, no school projects to help with, no one who needs me for anything except strategic decisions and profit margins. That's a choice you can change, Ethan said gently. Is it? I've spent 20 years building this life. I don't know how to be anyone else. Neither did I, Ethan replied. 6 months ago, I was convinced I'd spend the rest of my life exhausted and invisible, that I didn't deserve anything better, and then someone showed up in my kitchen and told me I was wrong. Victoria laughed, but it sounded like it hurt. Are you using my own intervention against me? I'm reminding you that change is possible, even when it's scary, even when you don't know who you'll be on the other side of it. They talked for another hour, the conversation drifting from work to life to the strange parallel exhaustion they both carried. When they finally hung up, Ethan felt like he understood Victoria better, not as a CEO or a reformer, but as a person who'd achieved everything she thought she wanted and realized too late that achievement without connection was just another kind of poverty. The next morning, Ethan made pancakes with Lily, helped her finish her school project, and took her to the park. They spent the whole day together, and when he tucked her into bed that night, she smiled at him with uncomplicated joy. "This was a good day, Daddy." "Yeah, baby, it was. Can we have more days like this?" "We're going to," Ethan promised. "I'm going to make sure of it." 2 weeks later, Victoria showed up at Ethan's apartment unannounced on a Saturday morning. He opened the door to find her standing in the hallway looking uncertain, holding a bakery box. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I should have called first. I didn't know if you'd say no if I asked, so I thought I'd try the direct approach." "Victoria?" Ethan was aware he was wearing sweatpants and an old t-shirt, that he hadn't shaved in 2 days, that his apartment was cluttered with Lily's toys and his work papers. "What are you doing here?" "I brought pastries," she said, holding up the box like a peace offering. "And I wanted to ask if maybe I could spend some time with you and Lily today. If that's appropriate, if it's not crossing a professional boundary." Ethan stared at her. This wasn't CEO Victoria Hale. This was someone who looked nervous and hopeful and deeply uncertain about whether she was welcome. "It's Saturday," he said. "I know. I'm sorry. I should have... No, I mean, it's Saturday and you're not working. That's progress." Victoria smiled, tentative but real. "I'm trying to learn how to be a person who exists outside of board meetings. It's harder than I expected." Lily appeared behind Ethan, curious about the visitor. "Kitchen lady." "Hi, Lily," Victoria said. "I brought pastries. Is it okay if I visit for a while?" Lily looked at Ethan for confirmation. He nodded and she grinned. "Okay. Do you want to see my room? I painted a picture of a dragon and Daddy hung it on the wall." "I would love to see it," Victoria said. Ethan let them in, watched Victoria set the bakery box on the kitchen counter, the same counter she'd cleaned months ago, and followed Lily down the hallway with the careful attention of someone learning how to interact with a child. He made coffee, set out plates, and listened to his daughter's excited voice, explaining her artwork in elaborate detail. When they returned, Lily was holding Victoria's hand, and Victoria looked like she might cry. They ate pastries at the kitchen table, and the conversation was surprisingly easy. Victoria asked Lily about school, about her favorite subjects, about her friends. She listened with genuine interest, not the performative attention of an adult humoring a child. And Lily, who was usually shy around strangers, opened up with the trust of someone who recognized authentic kindness. "Do you have kids?" Lily asked at one point. "No," Victoria said. "I don't." "Why not?" "Lily," Ethan warned gently. "It's okay," Victoria said. "That's a fair question." She looked at Lily seriously. "I spent so much time working that I forgot to build a family, and now I'm trying to learn if it's too late to change that." "It's never too late," Lily said with the certainty of someone who believed in second chances, because she didn't yet know how rare they were. "My daddy says every day is a chance to do better." Victoria's eyes met Ethan's across the table, and he saw gratitude there, and something else that looked almost like hope. They spent the day together, went to the park, got ice cream, walked through the city with no destination in mind. Victoria was awkward at first, unsure how to interact in contexts that didn't involve business objectives, but Lily's easy acceptance made it easier. By the time evening came, she was pushing Lily on the swings with genuine laughter. Her corporate composure completely dissolved into something more human. When they returned to the apartment, Lily yawned and leaned against Victoria's side. "You should come visit more," she said sleepily. "I'd like that," Victoria replied. "If it's okay with your dad." "It's okay with me," Ethan said. After Lily went to bed, Ethan and Victoria sat in the small living room with glasses of wine that Victoria had brought. The apartment felt different with her in it. Not invaded this time, but shared. "Thank you," Victoria said quietly, "for letting me be part of your day." "Thank you for wanting to be," Ethan replied. "I meant what I said to Lily, about trying to learn if it's too late to build something that matters beyond work." Victoria looked at her wine glass. "I've been thinking about what you said, about change being possible even when you don't know who you'll be on the other side of it." "And?" And I'm scared, she admitted. I'm scared that if I'm not CEO Victoria Hale, I'm nobody. That without the company, I don't have an identity worth preserving. You're wrong, Ethan said. You're someone who washed dishes for a stranger, who confessed her failures instead of hiding behind lawyers, who's willing to burn down her own reputation to tell the truth. He paused. That's somebody worth being. Victoria's hands were shaking slightly. I don't know how to do this. How to be connected to people. How to let myself matter to someone for reasons that have nothing to do with what I can provide professionally. Neither did I, Ethan said, but I'm learning. We both are. They sat in comfortable silence, and Ethan realized that something had shifted between them over these months. She wasn't his boss, not really. She was a person trying to figure out how to be human again. And he was someone who understood exactly what that struggle felt like. Same time next Saturday? Victoria asked as she prepared to leave. Yeah, Ethan said. Same time next Saturday. She left, and Ethan stood at his window watching her car pull away. The apartment felt different in her absence, not empty, but full of possibility. Like maybe they were both learning that rebuilding didn't just mean reforming corporate systems. It meant reconstructing themselves into people who could exist outside the roles that had defined them. In her bedroom, Lily slept peacefully, dreaming whatever 7-year-olds dreamed. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Ethan felt like he was building something that would last beyond the next crisis, the next struggle, the next survival. Something that looked surprisingly like a family, built from honesty and second chances, and the radical notion that people could choose to be better than their worst mistakes. The Saturdays became a rhythm. Victoria would arrive mid-morning with pastries or coffee, sometimes both, and the three of them would spend the day doing ordinary things that felt extraordinary precisely because they were so simple. Parks and museums, movies and grocery shopping, the mundane architecture of family life that Victoria had never experienced and Ethan had nearly forgotten was possible. 6 months after that first Saturday visit, Ethan noticed changes in Victoria that went beyond her increasing comfort with Lily. She smiled more easily, laughed without the careful control of someone managing her image, showed up to their office on Monday mornings with stories about weekend activities that had nothing to do with work. A pottery class she'd taken, a book she'd read, a conversation with her neighbor she'd actually stopped to have instead of rushing past with a distracted nod. The corporate reform work continued, but it had found a sustainable pace. Thomas had proven himself invaluable, his 30 years of experience translating into policy recommendations that actually worked because they were grounded in operational reality rather than theoretical efficiency. The pilot programs expanded. Worker-led safety committees became standard across all facilities. Budget authority for equipment maintenance shifted to floor teams. Injury rates dropped. Productivity increased. And most importantly, workers started to believe that their voices mattered. Ethan presented the 6-month results to the board of directors on a Wednesday afternoon in April, standing in a conference room that still intimidated him even after months of working in the building. The numbers were undeniable. Every metric had improved under the new protocols, but the real evidence was in the worker testimony videos he'd compiled, people speaking directly about how the changes had impacted their lives. I can take my daughter to soccer practice now, one warehouse worker said on screen. I have a schedule that's predictable. I can plan my life instead of just reacting to mandatory overtime. We fixed a conveyor problem in 3 days that management had been ignoring for 8 months, another worker explained, because we had the authority to just do it instead of waiting for approval that never came. The board members watched in silence. Some looked uncomfortable. Others nodded slowly, recognizing perhaps that this was what success actually looked like when you measured it in human terms rather than quarterly earnings. When the presentation ended, the board chair, a stern woman named Patricia Morrison, who'd been skeptical of the reforms from the beginning, spoke first. These results are impressive, she said carefully, but I want to understand the long-term financial sustainability. We've increased labor costs, added oversight positions, allocated budget authority to workers. How does this pencil out over 5 years? Ethan had anticipated this question. He pulled up a different spreadsheet, one that showed turnover costs, training expenses, injury-related losses, and productivity impacts. Under the old system, he explained, we had 35% annual turnover at our distribution facilities. Every worker we lost cost us approximately $15,000 in recruitment, training, and reduced productivity during the learning curve. We were spending millions every year just maintaining workforce levels. He highlighted the new numbers. Under the current system, turnover is down to 12%. We're saving more in retention than we're spending in increased wages and oversight. And the injury reduction? Another board member asked. Saved us $4 million in workers' compensation claims and related legal costs in the first 6 months alone, Thomas interjected. He'd been quiet through most of the presentation, but when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of lived experience. Turns out when you let workers pause operations to fix safety issues, people don't get hurt. Novel concept. A few board members actually smiled at that. The tide was turning, Ethan could feel it. They were winning not through moral arguments, but through demonstrating that treating people with dignity was also good business. Victoria hadn't spoken during the presentation, letting Ethan and Thomas carry the narrative, but now she leaned forward slightly. I want to be clear about something, she said. These reforms aren't optional or experimental anymore. They're company policy moving forward. The question before this board isn't whether to continue these practices, but whether to expand them even further. I'm proposing we implement similar protocols in our manufacturing facilities and corporate offices. Manufacturing makes sense, Patricia Morrison said. But corporate offices? We don't have the same labor issues there. Don't we? Victoria's tone was pointed but not aggressive. We have employees working 60-hour weeks, skipping vacations, burning out at rates that suggest our professional culture is just as exploitative as our warehouse management was. Different color, same fundamental problem. The debate that followed was intense but productive. By the end of the meeting, the board had authorized expansion of the reform program to all divisions, with Ethan and Thomas leading the implementation. It was a victory that felt both monumental and fragile, the kind of institutional change that could be undone by the next leadership shift or economic downturn. Walking back to their office afterward, Thomas was uncharacteristically quiet. You okay? Ethan asked. Ethan, just thinking, Thomas said. 6 months ago, I was convinced nothing would really change, that this would be performance, not transformation. But watching you present to the board, seeing them actually listen, he shook his head. Maybe I'm getting soft in my old age, but I'm starting to believe we might actually pull this off. Don't jinx it, Ethan said, but he was smiling. You know what the real victory is? Thomas stopped walking, looked at Ethan directly. It's not the policy changes or the board approval. It's that you presented those results, and then you're going to leave here at 5 o'clock to pick up your daughter from school. That's the whole point. Work that doesn't consume your life. Thomas was right. At 4:45, Ethan packed up his things and headed out, something that still felt mildly transgressive after years of mandatory overtime. He picked up Lily, listened to her excited chatter about a science project on butterflies, took her for ice cream because it was Wednesday and Wednesdays could include ice cream without needing a special reason. When they got home, Victoria was sitting on the steps outside their apartment building. Kitchen lady! Lily ran ahead, launching herself at Victoria with the unselfconscious affection of a child who'd learned this person was safe to love. Victoria caught her, held her close, and Ethan saw something in her expression that looked like peace. She'd started showing up unannounced sometimes, not every week, but often enough that it had become normal, part of their life, rather than an intrusion into it. I have news, Victoria said, setting Lily down. Professional news, but also personal news, and I wanted to tell you both at the same time. They went upstairs, and over reheated pizza that Lily insisted on serving on the good plates, Victoria explained that she'd been offered a position on a federal task force investigating labor practices across multiple industries. It was a 2-year commitment that would mean significant travel and reduced day-to-day involvement with Hale Industries. I'm going to take it, she said. Sarah Hendricks will step in as acting CEO while I'm focused on the task force. She's more than capable, and honestly, the company will probably run better without me micromanaging every decision. That's amazing, Ethan said, and meant it. You'll be able to impact the entire industry, not just one company. That's the idea. Victoria looked at Lily, who was eating pizza with intense concentration. But it also means I'll be traveling a lot. And I wanted to ask. She hesitated, vulnerability crossing her face. I wanted to ask if it would be okay if I stayed connected to you both. If I could visit when I'm in town, video call when I'm not. If I could still be part of your lives, even when work takes me other places." "Of course," Ethan said immediately. Lily looked up from her pizza. "You're not going away forever, right?" "No, sweetheart. Just sometimes for work. But I'll always come back." "Okay. Because you're kind of like family now." The words landed with unexpected weight. Victoria's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. "I'd like that very much," she said quietly. "I've never had family before. Not real family, just business relationships and professional networks." "Well, now you have us," Lily said matter-of-factly, as if rearranging someone's entire emotional landscape was no more complicated than sharing pizza. Over the following months, they fell into a new rhythm that accommodated Victoria's travel schedule. She'd call from Washington or Chicago or wherever the task force work took her, talking to Lily about school and to Ethan about the reform work, maintaining connection across distance. And when she was in town, she'd show up on Saturdays with pastries and stories, slipping back into their lives with the ease of someone who genuinely belonged there. The task force work was brutal. Victoria testified before Congress about industry-wide exploitation, faced hostile questioning from lawmakers who prioritized corporate profits over worker welfare, endured death threats from people who saw labor reform as an attack on capitalism itself. But she also built coalitions, drafted legislation, created frameworks for accountability that would impact millions of workers across the country. Ethan watched her transform through this work. The woman who'd stood in his kitchen 18 months ago, paralyzed by guilt and uncertainty, had become someone who wielded her power with purpose. She was still learning how to be a person beyond her professional identity, still awkward sometimes in personal interactions, still more comfortable discussing policy than feelings. But she was trying, and that effort mattered more than perfection. One Saturday in early fall, nearly 2 years after that midnight intrusion that had changed everything, Victoria showed up looking nervous in a way Ethan hadn't seen since those early visits. They took Lily to the park, but Victoria was distracted, checking her phone repeatedly, her usual focus scattered. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked while Lily played on the swings. "I need to tell you something," Victoria said, "and I'm not sure how you're going to react." Ethan's stomach tightened. "Okay." "The task force work is winding down. We've accomplished most of what we set out to do. 3 major pieces of legislation passed, enforcement mechanisms in place, accountability frameworks established." She paused. "Which means I need to decide what comes next. Whether I return to Hale Industries full-time, whether I take another position somewhere else, whether I do something completely different." "What do you want to do?" Ethan asked. "I want to stay here," Victoria said. "Not at the company. Sarah's doing brilliantly as CEO and doesn't need me hovering. But here, in this city, near you and Lily, I want to build an actual life instead of just a career." She looked at him directly. "I want to be part of your family, if you'll have me. Not as an obligation or out of guilt, but because you two have become the most important people in my life." The admission was raw and honest and terrifying in its vulnerability. Ethan realized that this woman, this brilliant, powerful, complicated woman, was asking permission to belong somewhere, to matter to someone for reasons that had nothing to do with what she could provide professionally. "Victoria," he said gently, "you've been part of our family for over a year. That's not something you need permission for anymore. That's just what you are to us." "I'm in love with you, Chet," she said abruptly. "With both of you, in different ways. With Lily because she taught me what it means to be present. And with you because you saw past the CEO to the person underneath and gave me a chance to be someone worth knowing." She was speaking quickly now, words tumbling out like she needed to say them all before she lost courage. "And I know that's complicated given our professional history, given the power dynamics that existed when we first met, given that you have every reason to be suspicious of my motives. But I needed you to know that this isn't about guilt or redemption or trying to fix my failures through you. This is about the fact that I wake up thinking about Saturday mornings and fall asleep hoping you'll both still want me around tomorrow." Ethan felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that had been building for months, but he'd been too cautious to acknowledge. He'd been so focused on protecting himself and Lily from disappointment, from the possibility that Victoria's involvement was temporary or performative, that he'd missed the obvious truth developing right in front of him. He was in love with her too, not because she'd rescued him from exploitation, not because she'd given him opportunities he'd never imagined, but because she showed up, because she tried, because she was willing to be awkward and uncertain and completely out of her depth if it meant being present in their lives, because she'd become someone who made pancakes with Lily on Sunday mornings and remembered that Ethan liked his coffee black and knew that Thursdays were hard because that was the day Lily's mother had died 7 years ago. "I love you too," Ethan said. "I didn't want to. Didn't want to complicate things or risk the work we're doing or expose Lily to another potential loss. But I do. I love you." Victoria's breath caught. "Really?" "Really." He reached for her hand, felt her fingers intertwine with his, solid and real. "You're not perfect. You're still figuring out how to be a person outside of work. You still check your email compulsively and forget to eat when you're focused on something. But you're trying, and that's what matters. You're choosing to be present, choosing to build something that matters beyond professional achievement. That's worth loving." They kissed there in the park, with Lily playing 20 feet away, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Not dramatic or earth-shattering, just right. Like all the pieces that had been scattered and broken were finally settling into something whole. Lily noticed, of course, came running over with the observational powers of an almost 9-year-old who missed nothing. "Are you guys boyfriend and girlfriend now?" she asked, matter of fact. "Would that be okay with you?" Victoria asked, suddenly nervous again. Lily considered this with the seriousness the question deserved. "Will you still come over on Saturdays?" "Every Saturday I possibly can," Victoria promised. "And you'll still help me with my homework?" "Absolutely." "And you won't make my daddy tired again?" The question hit differently now. Victoria knelt down to Lily's level, meeting her eyes with complete honesty. "I will do everything I can to make sure your daddy has time for you and time for himself. That's a promise. And if I ever break that promise, I want you to tell me, okay? Because you matter more than any job or project or professional obligation." Lily studied Victoria's face, reading sincerity the way children could, unfiltered by adult cynicism. Then she nodded. "Okay, then I think it's good. I like having you around." "I like being around," Victoria said softly. They spent the rest of the day together, and everything felt different in subtle ways. Touches that lingered slightly longer. Smiles that carried new meaning. The comfortable ease of people who'd stopped pretending they weren't building something permanent. That evening, after Lily was asleep, Ethan and Victoria sat on his small balcony with wine and the comfortable silence of people who didn't need to fill every moment with conversation. "I'm scared," Victoria admitted. "I've never done this before. Never let myself be vulnerable to someone. Never built a relationship that wasn't transactional. I don't know how to be a partner, don't know how to be a parent figure to Lily. I'm going to make mistakes." "We both will," Ethan said. "But that's what makes it real. Messy, imperfect, but real." "I want to do this right," Victoria said. "Want to be present. Want to show up not just physically, but emotionally. Want to be someone Lily can count on, someone you can trust completely." "You already are," Ethan replied. "You've been showing up for almost 2 years. That's not performance. That's commitment." They talked late into the night, planning a future that felt both terrifying and full of possibility. Victoria would finish her task force work, transition away from day-to-day corporate operations, focus on consulting and advocacy work that allowed her to stay in one place. Ethan would continue the reform work at Hale Industries, working with Thomas to expand the programs they'd built. And together they'd figure out how to be a family, blended and unconventional but genuine. The following months brought their own challenges. Adjusting to living together, Victoria eventually moved into a larger apartment that could accommodate all three of them, learning to navigate disagreements and different parenting philosophies, managing the complexity of their professional relationship now that it was intertwined with their personal one. But they worked through each challenge with the same honesty that had defined their relationship from that first midnight conversation in Ethan's kitchen. Thomas retired after 3 years of reform work, satisfied that the systems they'd built were sustainable and meaningful. He came to dinner every Thursday, an honorary grandfather to Lily and a trusted friend to both Ethan and Victoria. The worker-led programs continued to expand, becoming industry standard as other companies recognized that sustainable success required treating workers with dignity. Victoria's task force recommendations led to significant federal legislation that transformed labor practices across multiple industries. Ethan was invited to testify about the implementation challenges, his perspective as someone who'd experienced exploitation firsthand, carrying weight that corporate executives' testimony never could. But the real measure of their success wasn't in policy changes or congressional testimony. It was in the ordinary moments that made up their lives. Ethan picking up Lily from school without exhaustion, weighing on every step. Victoria learning to braid Lily's hair, awkward at first but improving with practice. Family dinners where they talked about homework and weekend plans instead of overtime shifts and survival strategies. It was in Lily's 10th birthday party, surrounded by friends and laughter, with both her father and Victoria present and engaged. It was in Ethan's promotion to Vice President of Labor Relations, a position he'd never imagined holding, but that he filled with competence born from lived experience. It was in Victoria's consulting practice that allowed her to impact industry standards while maintaining the work-life balance she'd never thought possible. One evening, 3 years after that first midnight intrusion, they were cleaning up after dinner when Lily asked a question that stopped both adults in their tracks. "Do you think my mom would like Victoria?" Ethan had talked about Sarah with Lily over the years, keeping his late wife's memory alive without letting grief consume their present. But this was the first time Lily had explicitly connected her mother to their current family structure. "I think she would," Ethan said carefully. "Your mom wanted you to be happy and loved. She'd be glad you have someone else who cares about you so much." "I think so too," Lily said, "because Victoria makes you smile the way you smile in the old pictures with Mom. Like you're really happy, not just pretending." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She'd never tried to replace Sarah, never pretended to be Lily's mother, but she'd committed to being present in Lily's life in ways that mattered. And this acknowledgement, this recognition from a child who remembered enough to make meaningful comparisons, meant everything. "Thank you, Lily," Victoria said softly. "That means more to me than I can explain." That night, after Lily was asleep, Ethan and Victoria stood together, looking at the city lights visible from their balcony. The view was better from this apartment, higher up, more expensive. But it wasn't the view that mattered. It was standing here together, building something that neither of them had thought possible when Victoria first appeared in a stranger's kitchen with truth and guilt in equal measure. "Do you ever think about that night?" Victoria asked. "When I showed up uninvited and upended your entire life?" "Every day," Ethan said, "but not with anger anymore, with gratitude. You gave me my life back. Not the job or the money, though those mattered, but you gave me the belief that I deserved better than exploitation, that my time mattered, that my relationship with my daughter mattered, that I was worth more than productivity metrics." "You gave me something too," Victoria said. "You gave me permission to be human, to fail and try again, to build a life that means something beyond professional achievement." She leaned against him, solid and warm. "I came to your apartment to confess my failures. I didn't expect to find a family." "Neither did I," Ethan replied. "But I'm glad we did." They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the city lights blur into patterns that looked almost like stars if you didn't think too hard about light pollution and urban development. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, work responsibilities, parenting decisions, the ongoing complexity of building systems that valued human dignity over abstract efficiency. But tonight was for this moment, for recognizing how far they'd come from that midnight encounter that had changed everything. Inside, Lily slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that both her father and Victoria would be there in the morning, that her life included pancakes on Sunday and homework help and Saturday adventures, that she was loved not despite the messiness of their blended family, but because of it. And in the quiet of that evening, Ethan realized that this was what redemption actually looked like. Not grand gestures or perfect transformation, but choosing every day to be present, to show up, to build something real from the wreckage of what had been broken. Victoria had come to his kitchen seeking absolution for her failures. What she'd found instead was the messy, complicated, beautiful work of becoming someone who chose people over profit, connection over achievement, love over the safe distance of professional relationships. And Ethan, who'd spent years believing he deserved nothing more than exhaustion and survival, had learned that sometimes the most radical act was accepting that you were worthy of rest, of joy, of a future that wasn't defined by grinding yourself down to nothing. They'd both been tired in different ways, him from physical exploitation, her from the soul-crushing emptiness of achievement without meaning. And they'd found healing not through fixing each other, but through building something together. A family that chose presence over performance, a life that measured success in moments rather than metrics. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was real and honest and filled with the kind of ordinary magic that came from showing up for each other day after day, year after year, building trust through consistency rather than grand gestures. The city lights continued their endless dance. Inside, their daughter dreamed, and tomorrow they would wake up and do it all again. The work, the challenges, the small joys that accumulated into a life worth living. Because that's what they'd both learned, through pain and transformation and the slow, patient work of becoming people who chose differently. That survival wasn't enough. That they deserved more than just getting through each day. That family was something you built through choice and commitment, not just biology or obligation. And standing there together, watching the night settle over the city that had witnessed their transformation, Ethan and Victoria finally understood what it meant to stop surviving and start living. To build a home not from perfection, but from presence. To love not despite their scars, but because those scars had taught them both what actually mattered. The kitchen was clean, the apartment was quiet, and for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, they were exactly where they were supposed to be. Not because some external force had placed them there, but because they'd chosen it. Together. Every single day. And that choice, renewed and recommitted to morning after morning, was the only redemption that mattered, the only transformation that lasted, the only family worth building.